a smart building allows us to get data. And I guess what I'm saying is useful data. So, and is that data allows us to understand the both the urban context, but also the actual building performance itself. I think it also goes into automation, whether it's smart facades, where there's some robotics in there as well.
Yeah.
We hear a lot these days about the Internet of Things.
Yes.
So is everything connected within the building, talking to each other? As people leave rooms, lights get switched off.
Yeah.
This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Rushan Senanayak.
What's up, listeners? Welcome back to another cutting-edge episode of Inspiring Design, featuring some of the best minds speaking about the latest emerging technologies. So today we speak about Building 2.0, the next iteration of building design, architecture, and the technology integration into the built environment. One of my favorite hot topics, given my personal background in architecture as well. So to speak about this, I have here with me Chris Paterson. Chris, a senior principal architect and director of Populous Asia Pacific Board, brings over 20 years of experience in designing large-scale, highly specialized buildings that leave a lasting impact on the cities and its enduring precincts. His portfolio encompasses high-profile sports and entertainment projects across Asia Pacific, including some of the award-winning Accor Stadium, Suncorp Stadium, Combank Stadium, KL Sports City, and ICC Sydney. He is deeply committed to a holistic, sustainable design and continuously seeks to challenge design thinking and sustainability approaches to ensure his projects are future-focused and lead to a meaningful legacy outcome. So he's the man for the job. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. All right, Chris, welcome to Inspiring Design. Thank you so much for being here. As usual, can we start off with a little bit of your background? What's your story all about?
Yeah, good morning. My name's Chris Paterson. I'm an architect and director at Populous, based in the Brisbane office. My background is originally South African, but been in Australia for over 30 years now.
I can hear the twinge of the accent.
But I actually studied architecture in South Africa, so not in Australia.
Yeah.
And I think some of that's actually quite interesting. We learnt to understand the impact of community that architecture has, and also be very careful with our resources, the limited resources. So I think it was actually a good way to sort of study architecture and understand the importance of architecture itself. And I guess we're going to be talking a little bit about technology today. And I think when I started, I used MS-DOS for AutoCAD.
Wow, yes.
So, that's a long time ago.
Absolutely.
So that wasn't very good. So I learned the importance of sort of sketching and model making and how that helps with critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess the other bit of background is my family's very much into design. I have a wife who's sort of worked in urban design and landscape, and my daughter's an architect as well.
Very creative family. Fair enough. Well, look, a unique experience, and I think hearing from professionals such as yourself is what this podcast is all about, and understanding industry's applications. So the topic for today is this concept and this word that's being thrown around on Building 2.0. You know, this next iterations of buildings. Shout out to a previous episode where I spoke to an engineer where they talked about live buildings and living buildings as well. So in your terms and in your experience, what exactly is Building 2.0?
It involves a lot of things. So I guess as a overarching thing, I think it's about the processes and methodologies, and obviously technology that the architecture and engineering industry works in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about trying to, I guess, bring in a new era for the built environment. I think the other important thing around that is the importance of policy, allowing government needs to actually enforce this in some of our projects to move it forward.
Yeah.
But as I said, it involves many different things. So I think there's digitalization, there's BIM, there's the whole prefab and modularization of construction, and then we go into the green building practices, the understanding of precinct developments and how that might help around shared utilities and biodiversity, and then understanding of sustainable materials.
Yeah.
And it's all trying to bring all those together, and it's from a city side and also into the building itself.
Yeah, wow. So does that mean, before we get into the tech, because this current season for the podcast is focused on emerging technologies. Before we get into that part, how is this more complicated from an architect's perspective, given, let's say, 10 to 20 years ago? Is there much more considerations that an architect has to do compared to, let's say, a couple of decades ago?
I mean, I think it uniquely suits the skills of an architect. I mean, an architect has to collaborate, understand all parts of the building. But to go to your question, yes, we have so much more data coming in, so much more collaboration needed to produce these outcomes. So yes, it is much more complex now. Yeah. But I think it uniquely suits what architects have been trained to do.
Absolutely, and and you mentioned this word collaboration because that's an underlying key human skill, and it's becoming more and more prevalent as well in industry, regardless of the sector almost. What does that look like when you say collaboration? What kind of stakeholders are architects collaborating with?
The importance of the entire design team. And if I look at the work that Populous does, we are highly reliant on engineers. Our buildings are very much a complex, almost mechano set that requires the input of structural building engineers, environmental engineers, etc.
Yeah.
And often see our role as, I guess, being that conductor, sort of trying to bring that all together into something that is appropriate, emotional, has that human impact, also very practical, sustainable, etc.
Yeah, wow, so a big job. So let's get into the technologies of what this looks like. What kind of technologies are now integrated in this next iteration of what's looking as Building 2.0?
As I mentioned earlier, it starts, I guess, around BIM. So we are bringing in a whole lot of data inputs into our models themselves. And we actually then can test our models, which actually help us test in the real world. And ultimately, I feel from our point of view, it can go from the user experience. So we talk about experience twins. So we have our models where you're actually experiencing the models and trying to actually understand that user experience. But it also allows us to understand materials. Can we actually work with supply chains? So we bring in materials that are green materials. Can we recycle? What is the end of life of buildings? Can those be recycled as well? And it's testing all those together. And that comes from, as I said, the digital twin side, understanding adaptive and smart materials. Can materials change? Yeah. How do they adapt to light? So I guess I'm saying here there's this whole ecosystem in there.
Absolutely.
And the role for us is to actually find what is the real information we need and how can that be used in the real world.
Absolutely. And this concept of building information modeling was actually around quite some time now.
It's been around for a long time.
Absolutely. And even like myself, when I was going through university, I was an RA, a research assistant on building information modeling at a university here. And I think the uniqueness was it was a concept back in the day, and this concept of 12D modeling was always thrown around, and it's still being discussed. Now, we're pretty familiar with 2D, 3D, and even 4D is now becoming quite prevalent. How many dimensions do you think are there, and in a regular industry practice, is 12D actually used in its capacity, do you think, or do we have more room for growth?
I mean, I think we do, but I'd sort of temper it a little bit. I still think the building industry hasn't moved ahead enough. Mm-hmm. If I look at other industries, they've innovated a lot, whereas the building industry, yes, we do, but we actually haven't as a whole industry innovated enough, and I think we need to innovate quicker.
Yeah.
So we're still producing at times 2D drawings.
Yeah.
That need to be signed off and used on site. Where I think we can actually be using our models, walking around sites with our iPads, 3D printing from those models. There's a lot more we can do, and I often think that comes down to we're not using enough modularization in our buildings. And I think if we do that, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't have to be reinvented. We can actually modularize and make things quicker, but we can still do it in a way that's appropriate in terms of climate, uniqueness, sense of place, etc. So that it actually has a uniqueness to it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the unique parts about this whole technology of 12D or building information modeling is it's almost acting as an asset that you can give to the client so that it is a digital copy of it. It's probably hard to quantify, and but how can you describe the data density of a model like this for someone who doesn't know outside this industry? What are we talking about? Is this like every screw and bolt that's part of every staircase? Do we have that level of detail? Like how much goes into a model like this?
Yes, you can get down to that level of detail, and the importance, I guess, from an architectural point of view is understanding how much modeling you need to do. But if we talk about the federated model, which is a model that actually brings in everyone working on a project, that model goes down to the level of a screw.
Yeah, wow.
And you can use that then to produce shop drawings, which go out to fabrication.
Yeah.
It allows the cost planners to understand quantities and do that work.
Yeah.
To even the civil engineers and the amount of cut and fill they need to do in volumes, and how they can work through that. So it's and then the model can then move into post-occupancy. So when the building's open, then there's a whole lot of information around the data coming in through their building systems, so air conditioning, lighting, how much energy has been used, and you can then fine-tune the building around that and using the data both in the real world but also within that BIM model itself.
Yeah, great. And obviously this is why there's a huge, long skill set behind the development of these types of skills.
Yep.
So going back to the skills pipeline, so to speak, or students that might be interested in joining architecture into this new technologically diverse era, when should they be starting to use these things? Is it at school or is it at a university level? I mean, I feel like it's shifted since when I went to uni.
Thanks for asking that question, because I think at times there's a headlong rush into the technology, and I think particularly as an architect, you need to be able to think critically and understand all your data, and often find if you're rushing into the technology, you're actually not quite sure what you're drawing at times.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the ability to sketch and feel what the design is about, I think, is still important. So that traditional sort of practice of architecture, I think, is still very important.
Yeah.
Which goes back into which I think is a love of yours, is the critical thinking. But you can't practice as an architect without the technology.
Yeah.
So it's up to each individual person to understand how they're going to use it. They might be letting other people sort of do a bit of the drawing. But yeah, to start again, it's being able to sketch, being able to understand, but then choosing tools that'll help you communicate.
Absolutely. I think that's a good way of saying it, because it's almost this two sides of the coin that we need, rather than approaching it as, okay, we got to have tech skills or it's one or the other. It's actually in hand with one another. So that's really good to hear. One of the things I want to drill down into is this concept of a smart building. What exactly is a smart building in layman's terms? Who's never heard of it before? What exactly is it?
I guess a smart building allows us to get data. And I guess what I'm saying is useful data. So, and is that data allows us to understand the both the urban context, but also the actual building performance itself. I think it also goes into automation, whether it's smart facades, where there's some robotics in there as well.
Yeah.
We hear a lot these days about the Internet of Things.
Yes.
So is everything connected within the building, talking to each other? As people leave rooms, lights get switched off.
Yeah. I was literally thinking while you were speaking, this has to be IoT, but is the architect in charge of that IoT design, or is that an external consultant that's now part of this sphere of construction industry?
No, it's the architect isn't, but the architect's trying to understand how those spaces are used and the feeling and quality of those spaces. But we have to work very closely with all our consultants.
Yeah.
And in a way, the best outcome is the technology disappears and it's all happening in the background. But it's very much there, and we are heavily reliant on a lot of consultants.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that
these buildings.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, as I talked a little bit earlier, that idea of experience and movement through a building. I think smart buildings can help you, and even the models. We talked about the experience twin. The other component of it is, smart materials. I've seen examples of bio facades that can change with light to deal with solar ingress.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think the other thing is, with that data coming in, can we take a much longer term view of our buildings and precincts and understand how they work, and maybe even move into the realm which is very sustainable, is the idea of adaptive reuse, so not knocking everything down.
Yeah.
How do we reuse buildings?
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of facets there to unpack almost. One of the things that caught my ear was this adaptive materials that you mentioned, all the smart materials. I think that's where the exciting innovations can lie and almost be quicker to integrate than, let's say, a change in the construction process, because it's a bigger beast to move. When you're looking at, let's say, smart materials, is this concept of, let's say, the whole building could produce energy rather than putting solar panels on top of a building and then that becomes an energy source to the building's use? Do you see concepts like Solar City? I know it's an Elon Musk company, but that concept of, let's say, the brick and the glass facade and every single tile collects and becomes this living organism. Is that even a possibility, do you think?
I think it is, but it goes down to having the policy there, such that, particularly in our world, we've got government buildings.
Yes.
So it's that policy of, are we pushing it? The materials are there, but often they might be not cost effective for that use. But I do think solar, I'm a big believer that our buildings are large objects in an urban environment, so they actually can generate a lot of power for the precinct around it. So it's not just the building itself, but it's for the whole precinct. So whether that's solar, there's we've seen technology, we've looked at it a little bit, where the movement of people on the ground creates power usage as well. So,
wow.
Our buildings involve a lot of movement of people, and I think that could be possible if it becomes more efficient in the future. But I think it's more this holistic look at the precinct and not just the building itself.
That's brilliant, because that's the, I think, systems thinking, but you also need a level of, you actually need a very crucial set of STEM knowledge, so understandings of materials, how energy transfers, human observations, human psychology. There's so many facets to the architect's world now. That's, I think, very exciting. You've already mentioned a couple of the technologies like building information modeling, IoT. Obviously, these are ones that are prevalent in the day-to-day of it, in creating these twins and so forth. You mentioned the word communication, the critical thinking skills, sketching skills, then we choose technologies to communicate. Do you see technologies such as, let's say, virtual reality, augmented reality being a part of the architect's skill set in the future or even now?
It's definitely now. I guess what we're seeing at the moment is we use a lot of Unreal Engine, which is a gaming software.
Absolutely, yes.
And so we are moving backwards and forwards between very highly technical models and into models that we use to communicate. So we had an example actually during COVID where we had a project up in Japan, and the only way we could actually talk through that project with the client was actually in the Unreal Engine model. So they would be in the model, we'd be in the model in different parts of the world, sort of working through that. So that sort of technology, I think, is going to keep going more and more and more.
Yeah.
But as I was saying, as a designer, as an architect, if you rush into that from the beginning, I think you miss out. You've actually got to have more of that tactile sketching. What is the big idea?
Yeah.
And then you slowly build up these technologies to get to that point of what the building is.
Perfect. This, the world is right now upside down. I haven't mentioned this technology yet just because I wanted to understand the others. And this particular technology usually tends to get the spotlight. Obviously, I'm talking about AI. And generative AI has been a disruptor for many design industries, many creative fields as well. How do you see generative AI playing a role in the architect's sphere?
I see it as another tool.
Okay.
There's a whole lot of complicated legal things around AI as well. And currently, the way I see the generative tool is just using an existing very large database to put things together very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But whether it's creating anything really new yet, I don't think so. I think the newness comes from that ability of, I guess, that real human creativity interfaced with this amazing technology, and to be able to iterate very, very quickly. And I think that's where the AI in particular is amazing, is how quickly you can iterate and work through ideas and throw them out.
Yeah.
And seen processes where you can move from your own sketch into a generative AI using that sketch, and then coming back out again, modeling, and then going back again. So as I said, it's a tool as opposed to that magic one button that someone pushes or says,
absolutely,
building. It's nowhere near that, and I don't think it will get there. Absolutely,
I think that's a good way of saying it, because you've put the precedent and the emphasis on human creativity, and it's a going back and forth tool. It has the ability, I think, to fast forward the way we do things and communicate things better, create better ideas. But as long as you're anchored with that human element, I think it can be a very powerful tool. The context of where Autodesk is also integrating AI into their tools, I think it'll be a really interesting space. There's some acquisitions I've seen from Autodesk side on what's going to be coming to these softwares in the couple of years. I don't want to mention it at this point, but I think best to go and check out Autodesk's blogs.
Yeah. And you can see it also within the Adobe software and
absolutely
visualization.
Correct. Absolutely. So we've talked about some key technologies. When it comes to the softwares, there's usually the ones that are the Autodesks, the Adobes. If you're an ArchiCAD-based firm, it might be Graphisoft softwares. Are there others that you mentioned, Unreal Engine? Are there others that software-based things that architects use or need to know as a skill set?
Yeah, I mean, you've always got your basic BIM software, which is your Revit, etc. I think with our practice, because we're international and work in many different areas, the BIM 360 model, where it allows one central model where everyone's working to, I think, is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
But I do have a problem with rushing straight into Revit. There's a lot of other software out there that people use, your SketchUps, your Rhino, And then I guess the parametric side of that, which when you real your plugins, I think those are really important. And then your endscapes, which visualizes your models and allows you to build up your storytelling, both internally as a design team and then externally to the client.
Perfect.
And then we have quite a lot of other software that helps us around our environmental modeling, from sort of understanding the climate, the precincts, your sun modeling, and I think we'll get to a point where you'll have all that data running in the background as you're trying to design and making decisions or analysis in real time. And I've seen that on some of our projects with some of the engineers we work, where we're all working in the same model. We can make a change as an architect, and their software is actually doing the analysis in the background as well. So in the past, we'd draw something, and 2 or 3 weeks later, the engineers would come back and we've done all this analysis, and it's not quite working. And then you go back whereas we're almost doing real time at the moment.
Love it.
And you could get to a point where that real time is then being drawn into models that allow you to do the shop drawing and the fabrication, and you can work a lot quicker in that regard. And hopefully the construction industry will follow with the ability to be able to do robotics and printing and other things such that happens very, very quickly.
Definitely. There's a conversation that I always have with these 7 to 8 key emerging technologies in the world that's going into every industry, and these are almost converging. And I can see the same thing happening in architecture as well, with the added complexity of multiple stakeholders. You have to collaborate a lot more information, a lot more systemic thinking.
Very large budgets.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it is. I can see the architect's role is much more complicated than what it used to be. If you're going back into, let's say, if you were in front of an audience of, let's say, all architecture students studying architecture at tertiary, what's your advice to them? Because I feel like there's detail orientation is almost one of the most important things now. The software skills need to be part of it. The sketching skills, the analog skills need to be part of it. What's your advice for them? I don't want to hijack your thoughts, but what's your advice to tertiary students?
I think I would start with a architectural degree allows you to solve or do problem solving in a creative way. And I think that's actually a critical skill in the current world.
That's music to my ears, because I've been saying that a lot.
So even if you don't even end up in the industry, it's that way of thinking, I think, is absolutely amazing, because things are getting more and more automated, and it's that way of thinking sort of makes you separate to other things. I think the other thing is, talked a little bit about collaboration, so learning from other industries and professions. I think that's very, very important. And sometimes you might think it's something nothing to do with what you do, but you can actually get something out of that. I listen to lots of different podcasts and try to understand what everyone else is doing, and sometimes there's an idea that comes out of that. I think the other thing is learn the importance of limited resources and sustainable design. We've been talking about it for decades, but I've seen that getting fast-tracked more and more now, and I think that's a critical skill.
When you mean sustainable design, do you mean more emphasis on just the environmental side, or do you mean environmental social?
All of it.
All of it, yeah.
Social, never forget social. Social is critical. Yeah. It's definitely the environmental, biodiversity, the nature of your site, the recycling. We think it's important that our buildings can be designed for deconstruction. Can they be reused again? Removed. Try and future-proof your skills. So you talked about the technology, so don't forget the traditional side of architecture. But how do you bring on people with you who've got some of those skills that you can bring it together.
Valuable advice, I think. If they've chosen that pathway, I think that's pretty much the same thing I've been saying even at university when I'm teaching as well. What's your advice for teachers? Because a large portion of our audience is actually Australian teachers, but there are some international teachers as well. when you're thinking about these complex skill sets coming together, it's almost unfathomable for a high school teacher. Do you have advice on how they could tackle these things if their students were interested in studying design and architecture? I know my one, I got into this field because of my teacher. Prior to choosing graphics back in the day, if it wasn't for the teacher, I would have gone down a medical pathway. So it was his insight and ability to see my skills and what he thought was suitable. It completely changed the trajectory. So full credit to him. But if he didn't do that, then it wouldn't exist at all. So I think that's the power of the teacher. What's your advice for them? How do they keep up?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that. I think it's sort of particularly around design itself, and if we're talking about architecture, in the past it was all about being able to draw and being creative. I actually think it's a lot more than that. It's finding students who have the ability to communicate, who have both that theoretical and practical sort of side to them. I mean, you're right. Teachers are very, very important, but I think it's finding that unique nexus between creativity and technical ability.
And look, it's a tough question. I did put you on the spot there a little bit because it's a question that literally everyone on this planet is trying to solve for teachers, right? It's not a problem just here in Australia. It's a global problem. So it's just unique. I always ask this question from every speaker just to understand the vast array of different points of view on how it comes back down to the education skills pipeline. But look, thank you so much. It's been I think a very diverse conversation, and we've only, I think, just touched the surface of these things. But if they're interested, are there any resources or anywhere that they can learn more on this stuff? Anyone who's keen to dive into, let's say, smart buildings or living buildings or building 2.0, where should they go?
From a personal point of view, I always say I'm always learning from my staff.
Okay.
So young people know a lot these days around the technology.
Perfect.
I'm constantly trying to learn from other industries. So there's a lot of podcasts out there that talk about that nexus between creativity and technology.
Yeah.
AI, etc. And sort of trying to do it from my lens. And whether it's in car manufacturing or graphics or whatever it is, seeing how that all comes together.
Yeah.
And I think for students, I guess do a little bit of shout out for Populous. We interact with the universities a lot. I know we're doing a module with QT at the moment. Perfect. And I think they can learn a lot from what our staff do in our processes and how we work on large complex buildings.
Love it. Now that's great. Get involved with, I think, those types of elements and learn from a diverse set of resources and not just this tunnel vision almost for just architecture. That's going to start to build and compound their skill set. So valuable advice, I think, overall. Last question is a bit of a random one, and I like to throw this at the speakers just to see, and I always make up the question on the go. In 10 years' time, if you could have one rule for architecture globally, what would it be?
I think architects can do much more. And often we've been, I wouldn't say sidelined, but we've had a lot of our skills being diluted into the construction industry and others. And I do believe with this technology we've been talking about, we can have much more control. Or when I say control, we can influence the process a lot more. And we do have this really important sort of need at the moment around resources, sustainability, social equality, etc. And without sort of blowing the trumpet of our architecture, I think we all live in the built environment. We can have a big impact, and I think the technology is going to allow us to have a large impact.
Absolutely. Now, I think valuable advice and valuable insight into the future as well. You've shared a lot. Thank you so much. And I hope the listeners will reach out to you on LinkedIn and then connect and learn from professionals such as yourself. So thank you for giving up your time. I think it's a valuable piece, and it's been great to be part of architecture again after almost a decade. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Now it's time to take action and build on the learnings to get inspired. First up, jump onto rashansenanayake.com/podcast and check out the show notes, links, and other relevant learning materials from this amazing episode. Next, if you learned something new today, click that subscribe button and set yourself up to receive live notifications on future episodes, as well as more opportunities to learn from our amazing guests, brands, and speakers. Last but not least, it's time to have your say. Join the conversation and share your thoughts and feedback on today's episode with a review, all while joining many others with a 5-star rating for Inspiring Design with Rashan Senanayake. Till next time.